Welcome, everybody, to the Pro Wrestling Wire podcast. This is Rick Del Santo, part of ProWrestlingWire.net, the AIWF network, and all over every podcast platform you can think of. Today I have a legendary announcer, Michael St. John, with me here today. How are you today, sir?
Rick, I am very well, and thank you. I am honored to be with you, and I know you got a great following. A lot of people know your name, and it's just a real honor for me to be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. We may have a little of a delay, but
that's okay. That's okay. All right. We'll work with it, and I'll edit it. I'll edit it together. All right. All right. Well, thank you very much. I want to talk about, first off, you were in the wrestling. Probably when did you start in the wrestling? 70s? 1970s?
1977 was my first play-by-play duty. I was a wrestling fan long before that, going back into the late 50s, early 60s. I had an uncle, my godfather, who was into wrestling and grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, half a block from the Patton Street Armory, where Nick Goulas and Roy Welch would have matches every Friday night. Yep. And go back a ways with a lot of the older if you would, the pioneers that I think really built the business to what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. But you were involved in radio before then. I guess that led into your professional wrestling career, correct?
Well, I got involved in radio when I was in high school, and started at a radio station when I was 15 years old. And it was something I never thought really long and hard about doing anything in the wrestling business until I sort of got introduced to Jerry Lawler when I was programming WMPS in Memphis, and Ron Jordan, my afternoon man, and Jerry were good friends, and I got to know the King. And when Jerry Jarrett broke off from Nick Goulas, they ran some shows. Lance Russell was a program director of Channel 13, where they had championship wrestling on Saturday morning, and of course Jerry went over to Channel 5 and didn't have an announcer. And one day Jerry called me up and asked me if I'd like to do a live in-person kind of tryout and they ran the show on Wednesday night at the Cook Convention Center, which was about a block and a half from our studios at WMPS on Union Avenue. And so I did, and Jerry liked it, and they used me for a few weeks, and then they hired Lance Russell, and the rest is history. And it was funny. I always used to kid Lance. I said, "Boy," you're the one person that can knock me out of a job in a heartbeat," because when Jerry Jarrett bought Nick Goulas out, I was Nick's commentator in Nashville, and of course Jerry started doing the shows at Channel 5 and bicycling the tape. So Lance knocked me out of two jobs, but I'll tell you. Talk about a legendary wrestling announcer and a fine human being. Lance Russell, none better. Better.
Yeah, it's funny. I've gotten, I do commentary for a lot of companies up here, and once in a while I've gotten compared to him as far as the tone of my voice when I'm behind the microphone.
Yeah, I can see that. I can hear that too.
Yeah.
Hello again, everybody.
Yeah. But he was a great personality. I grew up watching. I didn't get Memphis up here because obviously, as you know, I live up in Connecticut. I got it for a brief period in 1988 and 1989 with the CWA. And I didn't get it up here again until the late 90s with the, or not late 90s, mid to late 90s with before USWA turned into Memphis Power Pro. But I used to get tapes all the time and read about it in magazines. And it was always one of those very intriguing companies that I didn't actually get to watch a lot. But I would every now and again get a tape or so. So it was always fun. But then, of course, there was like obviously the Dallas when they
Sure.
They converged with World Class and stuff like that. That I got World Class every single day on ESPN. So every day when I got home from school, I sat here and watched the World Class, and then which eventually turned into USWA on ESPN. And I absolutely loved it. Which you were featured on that television show as well.
Absolutely. Mark Lawrence was the commentator for the Von Erichs for a long time. And
yeah.
Mark was a fabulous person and a great guy. And Jerry wanted me to get involved. So for a long time on those Friday afternoons, I was programming a radio station in Nashville, and I would jump on a Southwest airline at 12:30 on a Friday and fly. And back then there was a law about Southwest that it couldn't fly to any state congruent unless it was congruent to Texas. It had to touch Texas to hit a direct flight to Dallas. Right. And so you could fly through Houston or perhaps San Antonio or Austin. But anyway, I'd fly from Nashville to Houston, run the length of Hobby Airport, and catch one of those half-hour puddle jumpers to Dallas. And then Jerry had a car. They would pick me up. In fact, Paul Neighbors, who was one of the referees, would pick me up in a car at Love Field. We just lost Paul last week, by the way.
Yep. Yep.
And he'd pick me up and drive me to the Sportatorium, and we do the pre-show. And the funny thing is, I'd get ready, get done with the meetings and the pre-show, and I'd have about 2.5 hours on my hands. So I'd grab a cab and go downtown, grab something to bite to eat. Got to be a regular at Neiman's to buy clothes because I'm a clothes freak, and so I actually used my and heard a lot of great radio while I was in Dallas back then too. So it was a good trip. But then after the shows were over, they we had Waylon Jennings. Jerry had rented Waylon Jennings' bus, and 1 week the baby faces would leave first, and second week the heels would leave first because the bus would leave the Sportatorium. He'd go to the Denny's in North Dallas and drop the boys off, and then come back and pick up the other set. And I would be the one that would be left behind to make sure everything, stayed kosher. And so that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it and learned a lot and worked with a lot of great talent in the business as well.
Yep. Now, did you host the syndicated show that they had? Wasn't there a syndicated show that would show arena matches, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
I would get, I think some of those were released as official home videos at certain time periods, if I remember correctly. So going back like over 30 years ago, so forgive me. So almost 40 years, actually. So now that we think about it. But I remember watching those and you were hosting them. And I always it's funny because you kind of bounced in and out of wrestling at that time period. Because I was like, why isn't this guy used more? Why isn't he everywhere? Because I thought you did such a great job at what you did as a wrestling announcer, not knowing until many, many years later that you were heavily involved in radio for your whole career.
Right. I was a broadcaster. I was a radio broadcaster the whole time. And excuse me. And it was, I won't say it was a sideline, and I won't say it was a hobby because I loved it so much, but I was sort of more of an on-call kind of guy. I mean, the syndicated show stuff, we would tape 2 or 3 editions rather at Randy West's house. And of course, Randy was Jerry's son, or brother-in-law, and he lived right there. And I lived literally Cumberland Hills Parkway, and where Jerry Jarrett's house was in Hendersonville. If you drove another half mile towards Old Hickory Lake, you passed my house. And it became Bonita Parkway. And I lived on Bonita Parkway, and then 1 block over from me was Bill Dundee. So we sort of lived in the neighborhood. And then Eddie Marlin lived across Highway 31E in Hendersonville, so he was close by. So we were all within maybe 5 minutes of, if they had to have something right away today because they had to get it to a TV station or we had to get it to another promotion or something. I was literally on call, and I'd get a call, and Randy West normally would call me. Sometimes Jerry would call and say, "Hey, can you come up to the office? We need to shoot a reel," and no problem. So I was sort of a go-to guy, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. Now this came up in a recent podcast that I did. I do a weekly podcast Thursday nights live on YouTube with a bunch of friends. We talk about the current NWA product. So when I mentioned that I was interviewing you, one of them said, "Hey, I have to ask you about your time with Georgia Championship Wrestling Superstars."
So, the best promotion, the best short-lived promotion in the history of the wrestling business.
Yes. I don't remember seeing much about this. I remember reading about it more so than I don't think I've ever seen any tapes of this, but I believe that it is up on YouTube. There are clips on YouTube here and there. So, what was it like working with her? Was that with Ole, and that was in Jerry and stuff was involved?
Jerry and Ole had formed a bond. Back then it was a period of time when Georgia Championship Wrestling was looking for more towns to run, and they wanted something more local they didn't have to put boys on the plane for, from a standpoint. So Chattanooga was like the center of, halfway from Atlanta, halfway from 24 from Nashville, 75 from Atlanta, and an hour and a half here in Chattanooga. So that was, they cut a deal with Channel 3, which did not have wrestling for years. The wrestling show on TV in Nashville was Harry Thornton on Channel 12. And Harry Thornton was a local celebrity that had a morning show that was rated on the radio and TV. It was simulcast and was rated probably one of the highest in America. And anyway, so they go on Channel 3, and Ole would send, some talent up from Atlanta, and then some of the talent from Nashville would come down, Memphis would come down, and it was fun. That was the debut of Jim Cornette as a man for the first time, and people like Terry Taylor was there, and the Exotic Adrian Street. I mean, we had some, and Steve O from Atlanta. I mean, we had some good talent come through, but it was so funny because Ole was, and I didn't have a chance to work with Ole on mic until back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I did a show with Ronnie West up in Cleveland, Tennessee, and it was for a pay-per-view of some sort, and Ole was my commentator, was my guest announcer with me, my color man, if you would, and he was in a wheelchair at that point, and had severe problems from diabetes, and I got to know him, and he didn't realize when we first started taping who I was from back then. So about midway through the show, about the first intermission, we got to talking. He said, "Well, what's your background?" And I told him, I said, "Well, you and I have met before." And because I was on the show in Atlanta with Gordon Soley a couple of times. He looked at me and he went, "Oh, you're that guy." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm that guy." And Ole was still a crusty, tough son of a gun. But by the end of that little 2-hour deal we had he must have liked me because he sent his wife out to the car to get a copy of his book, and he gave me an inscription in the book, and he said, "To my new friend Michael St. John, so great to work with you, Ole Anderson." I'm like, and I've still got the book, and I'm like, I don't think he ever said that to a lot of people, so I feel sort of honored.
Not from what I heard. I heard he was not a pleasant human being and very bitter for many, many years. Yeah.
He had during just that show, I noticed he was negative on a lot of things, and I'd have to sort of work around it. But as a wrestling guru, and really I have to give the man his props. He was a genius when it came to those kind of things. But getting back to the question though, he and Jerry were on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Ole liked wrestling to look almost like the amateur is real. You hit somebody, and that kind of thing. And Jerry, it was all about, what kind of bar fight can we get into tonight? And that's what sold tickets. The sign on Jerry Jarrett's office wall is the world knows about it now. It's personal issues sell tickets, draw money. Personal issues draw money. And Ole was more into the style of how the wrestling was presented. And Jerry was more, let's get butts in the seat, and this is how we do it. And so it was a clash of styles. But it was so funny because one Saturday I'd go down, and I'd drive down or ride down, and we'd get down there, and the studio would look like Memphis, very stark, curtains, maybe a logo in front of the desk. And, the next week, it'd be Georgia Championship Wrestling with flags hanging everywhere and big logos and a big podium and the whole thing. And it was like, this is odd. But, when you look back on it, there was a lot of good talent, again, that came through there. And I give credit to the talent. They did a great job to deal with what they had to deal with.
You mentioned Terry Taylor. Now, there he had a chance. He teamed with Bobby Fulton, right? Correct? As the was the Fantastic Ones?
Fantastic, with the first Fantastics. Yeah, that was Fantastic Ones. You're right.
Yeah. I had a chance to meet Bobby last summer. He's a very nice guy. Very nice guy. Yeah. He's not looking as great as these days, health wise, but he was very nice, friendly. But, Terry Taylor and him went on to like much bigger things, like in different, Taylor, great singles career, and Bobby teaming with Tommy Rogers, probably one of the greatest tag teams to ever exist in professional wrestling with the Fantastics.
Absolutely. And, that's the one thing, too, different about both the Atlanta side and the Memphis side of that particular era is the Memphis side, Bill Dundee was booking. And most of the guys were small and fast and good looking and, that kind of style. And then the Atlanta boys were big, they were bulky, and they were athletes. And so there was a style clash of sorts. But and we were picking up when they pulled the plug. We were picking up popularity. I mean, the TV station was a little upset that they pulled the plug because the popularity was increasing. But hey, it's one of those things you live and learn. And I don't think after that I would be surprised to learn if Jerry Jarrett and Ole Anderson ever spoke to each other again.
Yeah, it's pretty possible. Now, you said you had a chance to work with Gordon Soley during that time period. Probably the most legendary announcer to me. He's one of the greatest of all time, if not, he's at the top of the list, really, for announcers. What was it like working with Gordon? I've heard, that he was a very great guy.
Oh, he was fabulous, fabulous. I mean, we got to talk before, and I did 2 segments. There were little segments that they put in to promote the Chattanooga show on the 2 shows I went down to Techwood Drive on. And, I mean, the consummate professional. And the one thing about Gordon is you couldn't rile him up. I mean, how many times do you ever remember Gordon really being riled up, either in Florida or in Atlanta? So he was very staid. Brilliant man. He wrote children's books. I don't know if you know this, but he wrote tons of children's books. I don't know if he worked for the Golden Book Company or which company but he wrote these great little books. And in fact, I've got a couple of them that he gave my son. The thing about it is, after they would shoot the Atlanta show, they would have a car take him to the airport, and he'd catch a flight back to Tampa. And so the show and everything would be over by 3:00 Eastern. And I think his flight left at like 4:30. So he's home before dark or home at dinner time. And the second time I was up there, the person that was driving, his car was late, and he got a little nervous. And I said, well, my wife and I and our 2 kids, we were on our way to Florida anyway, and for vacation. I said, well, we can take you down there to the airport. And you sure? Not a problem. But I had a Winnebago, so I had to help him up into the Winnebago because he had a leg that had some problems, and that was one of the reasons you never saw him. I think he went down one time, and it was a bump that just totally was not supposed to happen on TV. But he was not as agile and mobile as any of us were at that time. But I had a chance to take him to the airport. The kids loved him, and the ex loved him, and he was just. And we got a nice little note. Thank you for the ride to the airport. Like a week later in the mail, there's a note from him. So, absolutely couldn't say anything ever bad about he or Lance. But when Lance and he got together and they paired them on World Championship Wrestling, I guess it was at that point, or the late goings of Georgia Championship Wrestling, the styles clashed too much. And I think the people felt it. The promoters certainly felt it. Even Against the Boys felt it. And that was that did not go for a long period of time, mainly because it's like doing football or doing baseball. You can't have 2 play-by-play guys. You got to have a play-by-play guy. You have a color guy. You have somebody to tell what's going on and shut up and let the other guy explain what they just saw or heard. And so that was 2 play-by-play guys together, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, I think that at that whole time period for the NWA, WCW was very experimental. They were still trying to find their niche. Ted Turner had only probably been a year into owning it, so they were bringing in all sorts of guys. Dutch Mantell was on commentary. Lance was in the booth with the Freebirds on some days. You know what I mean? So it was each week was different. You never knew what you were going to get. So, like I said, Gordon and Lance, probably on the same level, but they don't match styles really. Exactly.
And I think that's what they were doing. They were trying to find a comfortable position or a comfortable place for both of them within the structure. And sometimes it's tough to do. That's difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jimmy Valiant, Boogie Woogie, man.
Legendary Boogie Woogie.
Wait a minute, baby. Wait a minute. Hang on.
What are you doing around
What was that calling you, buddy?
This is our neighborhood.
You done made a mistake.
You should be retired, Boogie.
Wait a minute, boys. Let me take a bite of my king dog.
You say king dog?
King dog?
Is that what he said?
What happened?
Come on, boy.
Don't let hunger bully you. Get yourself a king dog and you too can become a super hunger fighter.
Secondhand Heroes and Home for Wayward Villains is a comic book shop and gaming store that also features Magic the Gathering and D&D. Located at 18184 Leesville Road in Evington, Virginia, Secondhand Heroes is your one-stop shop for you to get your nerd on. Open 7 days a week at 11 a.m., they don't close until the dice stop rolling. They buy, sell, trade, barter, and haggle, specializing in collectible toys, both vintage and modern, comics, Magic the Gathering, video games, console, and arcade cabinets to play, all set to free play. Host your game night with us. Monday night D&D video game competitions, and so much more. Something for the collector and gamer in us all. Call 434-317-0121 or shoot us an email with any questions to secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. Note, secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. That's 2ND, handheroesva@gmail.com. Come game with us.
So Memphis, I do want to bring up one situation I found on YouTube the other day. This had me dying. I think it was 1990. Sitting there in the booth, you're brought in, you replaced Dutch Mantell in commentary. He didn't like it. He confronted you and basically told you how pissed off he was that you took his spot.
I think he was shooting. No. Actually, yeah, that, and I think I was doing it, but they had Lawler's girlfriend, Stacy, I think was on camera with us. And, and I guess it was Lance, and Lance was taking up for me. At the time, I was programming radio in St. Louis. Okay. And I was coming down on Saturdays to do the show, or actually either Friday night or Saturday morning. If I got up real early on Saturday morning, I'd drive 55 down 55. But anyway, that was what that was, and it was and I think it was more entertaining for the boys in the back than it was for the fans. Right. Fans, I don't know if they knew how to take it, but Dutch is an interesting individual, and I think he's a very bright individual. But Dutch looks out for Dutch. I mean, I'm not going to say anything bad about him at all. I think he was a great worker. I remember him when he first came to Nick Goulis's territory, and he and Randy Savage were in the same group of talent, and they went on, and Nick had a run with them, perhaps one of his last major successful runs just prior to the Freebirds. And every week it was Dutch against Randy, and Randy was a heel and Dutch was a face. And and they just got in it, and they both could go. I mean, back then they were young, they were well versed in the wrestling ring, and they could put butts in the seats and give a hell of a match each and every week. And that was a heck of a run. And then of course Dutch went more towards the commentary, and then of course he did work with TNA as a booker and matchmaker and all that. And then Randy, of course, ended up in New York, and he was a great talent without a doubt.
Yep. Did you ever get approached by New York WWF at all?
I did, and that's a great story. Nobody ever asked me. That's a great story. I've never been asked about that, so this is pretty cool. In 1979, maybe 80, early 80, maybe late 79, early 80, I was good friends with a guy named Cal Rudman. Cal Rudman was in the record business out of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. He ran a record tip sheet called the Friday Morning Quarterback. The Monday Morning Quarterback. No, Friday Morning Quarterback. Yeah, Friday Morning Quarterback. He was the person that brought Cyndi Lauper into the wrestling world. He introduced Cyndi Lauper to Vince, and Cal did some stuff. Cal was a big wrestling fan long before. I'd known Cal since 1973. He and I used to talk. We talked once or twice a week, and he was a big wrestling fan, as I was. So we compared notes. He'd tell me what was going on in WWF back then, and then I'd tell him what was going on with Goulis and Welch and everybody down south in the territory in the Mid-South. And anyway, one day I got a call, and he said, Vince McMahon is going to call you. And I said, okay. And he said, he's got an opening for a position, and I recommended you. And I'm like, okay. Well, he called, and of course, I'm a radioholic. I'm one of these guys that when my feet hit the floor in the morning, I'm radio. When I'm go to bed at night, my head hits the pillow, I'm radio. I'm in a radio studio in my house, for God's sakes, right now. So, I mean, so I'm a radio guy. So I get a call from Vince, and he sort of outlines this thing. He wants a guy that does interviews and introduces things, sort of like I had done with Jerry Jarrett about the same time, and congruent to about the same time. And I thought about it. And I said, and he offered as a full-time job, wanted me to move to Connecticut or New York. And I talked to the wife about it and thought about it. Had 2 kids at the time. Had a great radio job. I was in Nashville. I'd gone to Vanderbilt. I was back in Nashville. Had 100,000 watt FM. We were on the run. We were on the rise. Top 40 things. Having to find a great the chemistry. The timing had the timing been at a different time, it may have happened. Right. So anyway, I called him back and I said, I really am honored. I really appreciate you thinking of me. And I know that Cal Rudman had introduced my name to you, but I'm a radio guy, and I think I'm just going to keep that. Well, it'll be known to me. Gene Okerlund got that job. And so when I look back at it, I'm thinking, well, Gene Okerlund retired in Florida, made very, very big money. Didn't work. I don't think I don't know if he worked as hard as I did, but I won't. Right. I don't know about his work, but I can tell you this: the benefits and the pay scale was much greater. So as a result, it was that position. So I don't know if you could say I was I'm sure that Vince had other candidates as well, but I was one of the candidates that passed up on that one.
Wow, I didn't know that. I always wondered, because there's certain people I wonder, like, they're pretty central to either that territory or what have you, like, and then it's like, why didn't they ever get a shot in WWF or WCW? You know what I mean? I always wonder that about you, because I thought you were more than capable of going up to New York and being, having something good up there. You know what I mean?
Well, you're very kind, and I appreciate it. I do hold the distinction of being the only Vanderbilt graduate ever to be a wrestling commentator. So I guess that'll be on my tombstone too. But the other possibility that did pop up was with the Sheik. With Zib, he came down and worked for Nick. Nick brought him in after Jerry had taken Memphis over, and Jerry really took the cream of the crop, because he took Memphis, which was going gangbusters, and he took Lawler, which of course was the draw. And then he took Louisville too, and of course Christine, his mom, was running Louisville for Nick, and so they end up in Louisville's a great wrestling market even to this day. I mean, Ohio Valley is still successful. So, and the former mayor, or the mayor of Louisville, just sold his part of Ohio Valley a couple of months ago. So, but he came in, and I did the shows. In fact, did several shows, and at the time. I was carrying the Sheik around. They did a show down here in Huntsville, where I'm from, and on a Friday night, and I had to bring the Sheik down and take him home, and because the Sheik was the ultimate kayfabe. I mean, the ultimate kayfabe. And I rode several times with him to Chattanooga for Channel 12 TV, and got to know him and he offered me a job. He offered me a good paycheck, but it was Detroit again, married, 2 kids, Nashville, second home. And I'm glad I turned that one down. Not that I wouldn't have enjoyed working for him. I think it would have been a lot of fun and certainly unique, but he was in financial trouble as well as Nick was at that time. And I didn't realize that, because they kept that kayfabe, if you would. So I didn't take that, and probably is a good thing, because I probably wouldn't have, the job wouldn't have lasted. And that's probably was a good thing.
Yeah, he didn't last that much longer. I mean, they went into it on, what was it, a recent episode of Dark Side of the Ring. I'm not sure if you've seen that on the Sheik, and they talked about how his promotion one time, probably one of the most popular in the country as far as territories, I think it just started to sink. What was it, late 70s or
late 70s? Yeah, 79, 78, 79. And in talking about the Sheik, and then they did go into it a little bit. Jerry Jarrett tried to get TV. This is a story that he tells, and God rest his soul, but he would tell. He went to Cincinnati and went to WLWT, which is Channel 5 in Cincinnati, and wanted to pitch wrestling, brought his tape, and he and Lance went up there to make a presentation to the general manager. What's funny is, coming circle, the general manager of WLW was part of the J-Corps company that bought Y107 when I was the general manager. So I learned this story from both sides of the story. Right. And Jerry and Lance went up there, and they wanted to see if Channel 5 would get them would give them time to put the wrestling show on bicycle on the tape every weekend, pitching for a Saturday and so forth. Because Jerry wanted to open up Cincinnati and Dayton, which at that time was closed down because the Sheik had been run out of it. And the general manager he said, well, before you go on, he said, let me play you something. He reached out behind him in the console and pulled out a VCR tape and stuck it in a VCR and hit play. And it was one of the Sheik's matches from Detroit. And I think it was the Sheik and Abdullah. So you can imagine it was like visiting a butcher shop. Right. And it was just gore. And he took the tape off and he put it back in his credenza. And he said, gentlemen, he says, I really appreciate you coming up. He says, but as long as I'm the general manager here, we will never have professional wrestling on any of our stations. And WLW, that family of stations back then, of course, that's where Nick Clooney started out, who was, of course, George Clooney's uncle. Rosemary Clooney started there, but they had WLW in Cincinnati, WLWT in Cincinnati, WLWD in Dayton, WLWC in Columbus, WLWI in Indianapolis, and I'm missing one. But they had 5 TVs that had Jerry got those on, because it would have gotten him in the Indianapolis market as well. It could have been a different story even back then. But because of that tape and because of the that general manager being turned off to professional wrestling, Sheik version versus Memphis version, it never saw the light of day.
I don't understand people that wouldn't want to put wrestling on their TV, because I've heard it before. Other stations that TBS didn't want to do it, or Turner Networks wanted to get WCW off, and they couldn't have been happier at that time period when they went out of business and got purchased by WWE. Because the guy, I guess whoever the head of it, just hated professional wrestling.
Right.
But professional wrestling brings in money. People like watching professional wrestling, what it is. When I grew up in the 1980s, there was so much professional wrestling on syndicated TV. There'd be Saturdays up here. I'd catch the AWAs on syndicated TV before it was on ESPN. Florida, I used to catch the Savoldis TV, all sorts of stuff. So, that part of wrestling, or that part of television, these companies are in dire, especially at that time period, in dire need of content. It just seems that these companies are producing content constantly, these wrestling companies.
Well, in the early days of wrestling, one of the first sports and by the way, I'm one of these people, I will always call wrestling sport, because the athletes involved are athletes.
Yeah.
They train, they work out. The event itself is secondary to the athletic ability of these people. And Correct. So I hold them in very high advance, a very, very high regard. But in the early days of TV, wrestling was on TV a lot because it was easy to produce. Yep. Put up a camera, maybe a second camera, put a commentator on, and put on wrestling. Put up a wrestling ring, light the ring, and there's your hour, there's your 2 hours, there's your 90 minutes. So it was very popular with the Liberty Network and the early goings and some of those old black and whites. In fact, one of the big Dennis James, I think it was a commentator for wrestling back on the Liberty Network in like 53, 54 back in those days. So, I've always been told by television people that, especially television producers that make content, one of the cheapest content to provide are sports, live sports. Put up a couple of cameras at a football field, put up a couple of cameras at a baseball field. Back in the days when it was very rudimentary, put up a couple of cameras, put a guy behind a microphone, and there you got your production. And so wrestling was, but I think wrestling hit a lull because, TV, you had 3 basic networks in the 70s, and then all the satellite TV started coming on board, and people had big satellites in the back. I had one that was twice the size of the house and all that stuff. And you could, but on those satellites, that's how I first got introduced. I saw wrestling from San Francisco, from the Cow Palace on KTVU TV out of San Francisco. I watched wrestling out of Dallas on KTTV, Channel 11 with the Von Erichs. Tom Pedicino, Joe Pedicino's shows were up there on the Bird, and you could follow them, and watch all the shows. But it got to where you got to be so many so you had so many channels, if you would. You had to have content. So again, going back to the old days, live sports, live wrestling. Look at ESPN today. ESPN today has a cornhole tournament on. Now, no offense, but and not that it doesn't take skill to play cornhole. Gosh knows I can't do it. But again, you're looking for production and to fill time, and you can't spend $2 million on each episode of cornhole tournament. So anyway, I think the economics plays into this as well.
Yeah, they host every year the hot dog eating contest or the bull riding championship. They host all sorts of stuff, and I guess it's entertaining to some. Were they playing poker on there as well?
Yeah,
on the sports network. Yeah. And ESPN has like 3 or 4 different ESPNs.
Oh my gosh!
Every channel really does these days. A lot of major networks do have 2 or 3 different versions. MTV. I haven't watched that since the '90s, but all that kind of stuff. So it's like there's always like a secondary, 3rd, 4th channel that involved, and there's Fox Sports. All that stuff.
I've always wondered, and it's funny because now when you buy a new television, I bought a Samsung television, and you've got Samsung TV.
Yep.
And then when you subscribe to Prime, or you can subscribe to some of the other Netflix, some of the other things that are up there, there are quote unquote free channels, and they're about everything. There's a channel. There's a Duck Dynasty channel, for gosh sake. I've always wondered, and going way back, why there's never been a total wrestling channel. That would, to me, if Jerry Jarrett were alive today, I think that would be something that he would want to do. But a total wrestling channel where you've got 24-hour wrestling. Now I know the WWF channel or WWE channel does that, but they also have other shows other than wrestling. They have biographies and they have talk shows and so forth and so on. But just a channel that's even on these free channels for LG TVs and Samsung TVs and Vizio TV. That's another one. I'm surprised there's just not a wrestling wall to wall.
I think Pluto attempted a 24-hour, Pluto TV. They just run a bunch of different stuff. They attempted a 24-hour wrestling channel. It showed kind of indie wrestling from the last few years, but nothing that was brand new. Mm-hmm. It didn't last long, maybe a year. There used to be a TNA channel on there, which that kind of went away. It's not on there anymore, but I think now it's on Roku, the Roku app, which is Roku's kind of utilizing it now. The NWA is coming there at the end of July, and there's another NWA channel on there, which features the NWA and Dave McLean's WOW. So there is the Parsons family. They were in conjunction with Jerry Jarrett at one point, where they bought a videotape library and they started the Wrestling Legends Network. Now, a lot of that stuff is up on demand on Tubi, or they have their own streaming app, which is, so there's ways to watch some of their content free. And they had a syndicated TV show that came out of the New England Sports Network as well, which Classic All-Star Wrestling. Out of this tape library, they would run stuff from Memphis and Southwest or all these like different territories that they bought the video library from. And when they first started that network, it was Jerry Jarrett and Rock Parsons and his son Adam Parsons. It was very interesting. And now it's just a streaming network that they haven't updated, but I guess they're in quite some time. But I guess they're starting to digitize a lot more now. Rip Rogers does host like a show on there as well. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool to watch like some of that. And the Savoldi started a streaming network.
That's my wife.
Okay. It's okay. It's happened a lot. It happens often.
I have the door open. Normally when I'm recording, I shut the door, but it's the air condition is it's not putting out the way it should in 100-degree weather in Huntsville, Alabama.
Secondhand Heroes and Home for Wayward Villains is a comic book shop and gaming store that also features Magic the Gathering and D&D. Located at 18184 Leesville Road in Evanston, Virginia, Secondhand Heroes is your one-stop shop for you to get your nerd on. Open 7 days a week at 11 a.m. They don't close until the dice stop rolling. They buy, sell, trade, barter, and haggle, specializing in collectible toys, both vintage and modern, comics, Magic the Gathering, video games, console, and arcade cabinets to play, all set to free play. Host your game night with us. Monday night D&D video game competitions, and so much more. Something for the collector and gamer in us all. Call 434-317-0121 or shoot us an email with any questions to secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. Note, secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. That's 2ND, handheroesva@gmail.com. Come game with us.
It's AIWF. Wanna see the best wrestling? Where to connect? The squared circle, the place you have to earn your respect. So get right with the program or you'll get left. AIWF across the US and all over the globe. We are live and direct. So tune and see who wins and lose stuff for the Lord. This match just got you over one.
Also with that, like the Svoldy started the streaming network, I think 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, with all the video library. And a lot of that features like late period world class from like 89, right as it was transitioning to the USWA as well. So it's very interesting. There are places to see some of that stuff, but a 24-hour streaming network with all that stuff, I think would be, I'd sit there and watch it. I know I would, because
it'd be, I think it'd have a lot of folks watching it.
Yeah, I don't watch a lot of stuff that's like modern these days. I read about a lot of wrestling these days, because modern wrestling is starting to watch it less and less. You know what I mean? As I'm getting a little bit older. So
well,
I don't know.
You bring up a good point about modern wrestling, so to speak.
Yeah.
And talking, I've gotten an opportunity to meet a lot of young people that have gone through the wrestling schools. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to hide it. I'm 74 years old, for gosh sakes. And wrestling, as I remember it, and as I worked within it, it was always a business that the talent, the people that were going to be successful rose to the top. Right. I bet I couldn't pick out 2 or 3 people in my history of involvement that were talented, that didn't take advantage of, or have people take advantage of their talent and move them up the ladder, if you would. And a lot of the young people that are coming through, but they got their training on the road. And people say, well, you know, they were working 5 days a week in the ring, and that was important. But you know what was more important? They were riding twice as long with older wrestlers that had been around the block and around the territories for gosh knows how long, talking about scenarios, talking about situations, talking about whatever. And so they had a classroom as well as an on-site training room with the ring.
Right.
And I think so much of that knowledge was provided. And if you wanted it that bad in the business, you listened and learned. And I don't see that as much as young wrestlers. And I'm not putting young wrestlers down. I'm not putting modern wrestling down. But I just don't see that schooling, if you would. They go to a school, but they don't get schooled.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. It's like they're not working as much either. Because a lot of these guys that get in, it was their life right from the get-go. They would train, go to school, they'd be training rather, and they'd be on the road 5 days a week, 7 days a week. You know what I mean? So they'd be learning constantly. A lot of the modern era is they're going to class, and you know, they go to their 3-4 months before their first match or whatever, sometimes a year, depending on how well they progress. And then it's oh crap, I forgot what I was going to say. And it's just like, you know, they're
all the time.
They're working on the weekends basically, you know what I mean? And then they go to train Mondays and Tuesdays, or Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or whatever, how many days a week, but they're mostly working on weekends. I know a few guys are, you know, there's not wrestling 7 days a week like it was, like a lot of companies, the localized territories, independents, whatever you want to call it. They're not running God knows what town Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So everything happens like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and sometimes Sundays.
You're exactly right. And the thing about working 5 days a week or 6 days a week or sometimes 7 days a week is, you know, and back then, with the advent of social media, if something happens in the studio right now, it could be all over the world in the next 5 minutes. And back then, you know, you could run an angle, and Nick Goulas was a mastermind he and Roy were a mastermind of this in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They'd shoot an angle in Chattanooga, and that night they'd shoot the same angle on Birmingham TV, And then the next week they'd shoot the angle in Memphis, and then they would build their house, their house show off of that angle for weeks to come in each of those towns. And you don't see that. That's the one thing too. And I had the opportunity to meet Tony, and I respect what he has done for AEW and what he's done for the wrestling world. A lot of people, sort of condemn it or put him down, but Tony, I think, has done a lot to promote wrestling being a mass appeal sports. Now, we know the WWE sits in the catbird seat. They're the Kleenex or the Xerox of the business. But I think Tony has done a lot, especially in a lot of countries that WWE do not go and visit. And Tony and what he's done with New Japan and what he's done with the Lucha Libre people and everything, I think has opened the eyes of a lot of casual wrestling fans to make them more advanced wrestling fans. So I give the man credit. But the one thing I disagree with what AEW does is everything goes so fast. I mean, wrestling was a great thing to shoot an angle. Somebody gets the heck beat out of them tonight on TV, and then 6 months from now, they're just then blowing off the angle. I mean, they build it, they work it, they do different styles of matches, they do different things to enhance the program, the angle. In AEW, let's do it tonight. Let's finish it off tonight. Let's do something else next week. And I don't know if long term that's going to be good for either AEW or the wrestling fan and world as it progresses.
Yeah, and I think that's been wrestling for the last probably 28 years. Something like the Attitude Era type thing, everything, because that's when the monthly pay-per-views started happening. It would just be, an angle would last 3-4 weeks at the most instead of lasting 6 months. And the whole style is different. Everything is move for move. There's no rest holds like a lot in AEW. I wouldn't say just AEW, but a lot of places, you know what I mean? Wrestling. There's I was having a discussion with somebody. It's like, you don't see an actual grappling match. You know what I mean? That these guys are going at it. When's the last time you saw someone sit there in an abdominal stretch, or win by a backslide, something like that, a schoolboy roll up? You never see those anymore. And it's kind of like, it's not the wrestling I grew up with or remember. It's not to say that it's not bad or that it's not good. It's just not my personal preference. It's like there's something for everybody with all the different styles of professional wrestling out there. I don't like the crazy deathmatch stuff. I just like good old fashioned professional wrestling.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. The thing you mentioned, rest hold, and that's sort of a hot button with me. I was at a panel. In fact, Bobby Eaton and I were here in Alabama about a month before he died. We were at a show in ARAB where one of my radio stations is. In fact, both of the ones on the wall are in ARAB, and right outside of Huntsville. And he was in, and we were part of a panel discussion before the show got together. It was one of the, you get to go backstage, one of those gold row kind of things. And right. one of the young wrestlers brought up rest hold. And Bobby looked at me, and I looked at Bobby, and I'm like, rest area? Restroom, rest hole, and he was referring to get a side headlock and get down on the mat, you're cinching up the headlock, all that stuff. And what's funny is, and we were laughing about it on another podcast, on the Randy Hales podcast a couple of weeks ago. We were running down a card from like 76, and I forget the two participants that were on the match, and I made the comment. I said, well, you're not going to see a drop kick in that one, because they weren't going to leave their feet. I mean, they're going to be Matt Bourne, not the wrestler Matt Bourne, but they were going to be Matt centric for the entire match. And so, but you don't see that anymore. And the other thing I think that wrestling has lost, is certainly on older fans and more generational fans, is the art to sell. And, to me, even on the pay-per-views, there was one of the most recent, I think even WrestleMania was one of you hit three of your, you hit your finish move three times before you and then the match doesn't end because you hit your finish move. To me, a finish move is you're finished. When Jerry Lawler would drop the strap, when Hogan would come down with the leg, I mean, when Bruno put you in the bear hug, match over, the signature move, match over. And now, it's like they pop back up like, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to sell it. It's a different, you're right, it's a different style, but how are you going to sell the intensity if you're not selling your moves, or you're selling your signature move, most assuredly? And I think that's sort of a blow off to the business.
Yeah, no, I get it. And it's, as an older fan, it's kind of frustrating to watch, because when someone hits a pile driver, that's when it's over. Nobody just gives up with a submission from a figure four leg lock anymore. It's
exactly
just nothing like that. And it's kind of like, what's the point of these moves or people trying to do them anymore? So it's just, it's something that probably people that we won't understand really necessarily, but it's the evolution of the business, I guess.
Well, it's true, Rick. But again, I mean, some of these moves, bless their hearts, on TV. I mean, back in the day, you would have a wrestler that would wrestle for 8 decades. Gypsy Joe, and who was one half of the Corsicans when he broke in the 40s, wrestled up until 2012 or 20, like a month before he died. And I may have the date wrong, but it was, he had all these Mae Young wrestled for like seven decades. She wrestled in 7 decades. Now some of these wrestlers won't last 7 years, and because of what they do back then, and I've heard Cornette say this, back then it was predetermined and called in the ring, and everybody protected everybody else, and nobody got hurt. Now it's rehearsed behind the scenes, rehearsed for something that's going to be on Monday night or Wednesday night and all, and it's all laid out, all choreographed, and everybody gets hurt. So it's a whole different world. I hate to see any wrestler guy. Liv Morgan, I think, was the latest one that came off the scene because she got hurt.
She separated her shoulder, right, when she went face down. But look at somebody like, and I've always said this about this guy, was Darby Allin. The way he gets thrown into things, just thrown right on top of the stairs like he's just a rag doll. But it's just, I don't think he's going to be able to walk in another 5 years because of the things that he does, and it's kind of scary to watch him, take moves like this, take these moves.
I agree. These bumps they take are incredible. You got to remember that Prince killed off his feet and his knees jumping off of a platform in a concert once a night for 17 years. One jump. He jumped 6 feet down on in platform shoes, and it ended up, I think, it ended up costing him his life in a weird sort of way. But these wrestlers, and you're right about some of these bumps and some of these. And you mentioned trash wrestling too, the light tubes and the thumbtacks. And I have a 6-year-old grandson who I took down to the AEW show to see Jeff Jarrett. Jeff and I are good friends still to this day. And Conrad was down there. Conrad and I are good friends. And by the way, he has as you well know, thanks to him, he's made people like you and me and others bigger than life in this business because of what he invented with the platform of his wrestling podcast and shows.
Absolutely, yeah.
So a lot of credit to Conrad. But I took Joshua down there, and we went in the back, and it was like 3 hours before the show, and it was total chaos. I mean, things were going on, and bless his heart, he was like this. I mean, he couldn't stop moving his head from everything that was going on. But that show, we stayed for part of the show, and I had to bring him home. Well, we watched the remainder of the show when we got back to the house. And we're sitting there, and in one of the matches, they brought out thumbtacks. And I said, no, we're not going to watch this. So I clicked it off. Only because at 6 years old, what is he going to take from that?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to... I'm sorry, but they always had the back in the day, don't try this at home stuff. And then kids would get influenced it and did it anyways. And now do you want them doing stuff with a table or thumbtacks or light tubes? Hey, we got light tubes in, my basement, so I got some in the other room. Are they just going to start using those? No. It's not a very good influence on a younger audience.
Well, and the probably, and I haven't watched a lot of AEW since, and I didn't see it live, but I had like 9 people send me the clip of Edge and John Moxley with the bat that was, and that was just, I mean, that was gross. I wouldn't want a boar hog to go through what John Moxley went through, whether you like John Moxley or not. I wouldn't kill a boar hog with something of that nature. And it was just, to me, I don't know if anything in this world, because of the world of YouTube and TikTok and all, is over the top in this day and time. But to me, and to a lot of people that are a lot younger than me, several of our listeners that are in their 30s were like, I'm turning this off. I'm not doing this anymore. And I think, and I think Tony being talked into things like that, I don't think that was Tony's idea in any way, shape, or form. But Tony being talked into these kind of things, I think he could. I think you have there's a point where you can't cross the line on television. I mean, if you want to do it on TikTok and then do a paywall or something and do all the crazy stuff and whatever you want to do, fine and dandy. But for public consumption, I still think there should and could be a dividing, if you would, the edge of the envelope where you don't jump off the edge. And I think that was way off the edge.
Yeah, I remember people sent it to me as well. I haven't watched AEW in about 2.5 years. It's just, I was kind of real supportive of it when it first came out because it's a new company. Give it a chance. They have a lot of really good talent. They were giving a lot of guys work that were in the independent scene that have been working for a long time. And then over time, it's just, as they had a few kinks to work out. Okay. Over time, it started to get a little better, but then all the stuff started to come out. Stuff like that started happening. And after a couple of years, I just said, I can't do this. And there's a lot of people that still support them and watch them, even though they're doing this stuff. It's not my personal taste. Go ahead and watch it. But I cringe every time I see something. I see stuff on like TikTok and whatnot. And it's just, I cringe every time I see some sort of clip that's similar to that. That thing was very cringeworthy of that. And Moxley could have gotten permanently injured by doing that. And that's the part that to me was the stupidity on both men's parts to take part in that in that spot.
Well, people say, well, it's all for money. Well, I don't know. It gets to be, I heard a great Paul Drew was a great radio consultant back when I was growing up, and one of the mentors that I had, I was lucky to know him, and he had the RKO stations from New York to Los Angeles. He had LA, New York, San Francisco, Boston. Memphis was his smallest community or smallest city he was in. And he taught me a lesson one time because I wanted to do, I was talking about doing a promotion and getting the station over and, this, that, and the other. And he looked at me and he said, that's a good promotion. He says, but what do you do for an encore when your first act is suicide? I went, that's something to think about. And so I think a lot of that can pertain to some of the wrestling that we see because, what have you not seen on TV other than somebody take out a gun and shoot another wrestler? I mean, that's crazy. On the other hand, back in the day, there were wrestlers that just were purist. And I spoke of Bobby Eaton earlier, and Bobby and I grew up literally 3 blocks from each other in the 5 Points area of Huntsville. We didn't know each other until we got, I was in Nashville working for Nick, and he came up as a 17-year-old wrestler with Nick and George. And Bobby ended up being probably the most consummate professional wrestler of our era. And anybody you talk to about Bobby Eaton will tell you that Bobby Eaton was, he could take a bump, he could give a bump, but everything looked good, everything looked real. And any show he did, whether it was in Hartselle, Alabama or New York City, you are going to get his best day in and day out. I don't know if that permeates the business in this day and time.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. I got to meet Bobby much later in his career, I think 2006, 2007. He worked a show up here in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Him and Dennis Condrey teamed up against the Rock and Roll Express on a small local indie show. That. Yeah. So I got to see that match probably 30 years later or whatever, 20 some odd years later. But it was a pleasure to meet all 4 men. That was the first time I met Ricky. First and only time I got to meet Bobby or Dennis. I'm just sitting there in my seat, and there goes Bobby walking right by me. I was like, it was awesome to see to see that stuff. And I think that was a Savoldi show, if I remember
really?
correctly. Yeah, so that's kind of and this is like, I think they were running a company called Liberty States Wrestling, which was associated with the NWA at the time. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Good
So
stuff.
it was a lot of fun. That was I'm sure maybe you've seen it on YouTube. It's the famous Kamala and Bryan Danielson match, and that's the only match that was ever. That was the headlining match. That was the main event, and that's the only match that ever came out from that event for some reason.
Sort of like the Legends of Wrestling event down in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and the only thing you ever see is Jake the Snake Roberts using me as a prop during an interview, or a prop onto, I should say. And it's at that point it's 6 foot and 140 pounds holding up Jake the Snake for 3 minutes. It was a little challenging.
Was that the Heroes of Wrestling? Is that what you're referring
Heroes
to?
of Wrestling, yes.
That's right.
Heroes of Wrestling.
Okay, I did see that live. I watched that live.
Really? You were one of 10.
Yeah, we had a hot box back in the day, and so living up here, me and my roommates at the time.
Cool.
It was on, so we were like, oh my god, what's this? And then so it was the most it was a pretty interesting show to see.
You should have been backstage. Talk about interesting. Oh, we had a meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock that morning. We went with the show started at 7 Central, or 6:30 Central, I think it was, and we had our meeting as to what was coming down 20 minutes before the show went on. So I mean, from 9 o'clock in the morning, it's like, when we're going to meet, when we're going to get together, and it was just total change.
Yeah. So why don't you tell everybody else what you're doing today before we sign out of here?
Well, thank you. I'm a radio station owner. I've got 8 stations in Tennessee and Alabama.
Wow.
We're the Fun Media Group, and Fun Radio is a classic hits style format. WRAB is actually a local station at 107.1 in North Alabama. That's classic country. My wife, who came in here to yell at me about something that was going on, is the general manager of everything. I just run my mouth and talk and go and shake hands and try to sell some advertising and this, that, and the other. But I've never worked harder, Rick. I've never been happier. And I got to tell you, I love when I have the opportunity to come on with somebody like you that has such a deep love and passion for the business of wrestling, which I absolutely have a deep love and passion for. Anytime, anywhere, I will do it in a heartbeat, just because I think the fans deserve to hear the stories of what built the groundwork of what they see today, whether it's wrestling, whether it's football, whether it's baseball, whatever. I think when you start ignoring history, you start destroying society. So, if I can add a little story here or there or something, maybe somebody, I remember that. And, that's why I do it. And I get to meet great people like yourself who make this business what it is today. And God bless you for that.
Thank you. And that's the purpose of this podcast. I try to bring guests such as yourself to talk about the history of professional wrestling, keep the stories alive. So each and every week, I've had some really great guests over the years, and you're just part of the list now that I'm very excited to have you on here. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm honored. And anytime you would want to do an encore or something, please give me a call. I'm always available for you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Good seeing you. God bless, and hope to see you again soon.